good people. How are you all today? I am doing quite well. Happy New Year. My name is Shelly Moise. I am the owner of Noelle's Garden Bath and Body. I create bath and body things that I'm going to talk about today. The first one is, what is soap? From a chemical perspective, what is soap? How is it made? And what does it do? We're going to talk about lather, how lather works to remove dirt. We're going to talk about, oh, here are my notes. The difference between handmade soap, store-bought soap, and why handmade soap is better. We're going to talk about it all. So first, let's start with what is soap from a chemical perspective. What is soap? Soap is the combination of three things. A water type ingredient, sodium hydroxide or an alkali. For today's soap, we're going to discuss sodium hydroxide, and fats. Whether it is fat from animals or fat from vegetable fats, you need those three things. You need water or a water type ingredient. So what is a water type ingredient? Milk is a water type ingredient. Tea is a water type ingredient. Juice is a water type ingredient. When I say water, when it refers to soap making, I am referring to a water-based ingredient. So you need those three things. So first, let's talk about what water is from a chemical perspective and what it does in soap. Water is an agent that causes other ingredients to break down. It causes the bonds or the atoms from a chemical perspective in water-soluble ingredients to break down. For instance, sugar and salt both are water-soluble, which means they will dissolve themselves. They will completely let go and relax in water. They will break down from their solid, hard form, and they will become one with the water. They will lend themselves completely to the water without leaving any parts of themselves behind. Salt and water both will completely dissolve. Salt and sugar both will completely dissolve in water, because that is what water does. Water causes other ingredients to break themselves. Second ingredient is sodium hydroxide. Sodium is a salt. It is the basic, sodium hydroxide, it is the basic, a chemical basic of salt. And sodium hydroxide loves water. Sodium hydroxide loves water to a point that it will pull the water out of the air and absorb it into itself. In fact, the lye that I have here in my home, I have to make sure that it is completely sealed tight and that it is in plastic sealed bags. When I was in Hawaii, I would often unscrew the top of my lye only to find water pellets sitting on the top of my container, because lye itself, sodium hydroxide itself, loves water and it draws water into itself. Our third ingredient, oils, butters, fats. Those of fat is, whether it's vegetable-based or animal-based, it is a triglyceride. What is a triglyceride? A triglyceride is an ester, a grouping of 3 fatty acids and a glycerol. It is a grouping, these 3 things together, of 3 fatty acids, tri, and a glycerol. So when you combine your sodium hydroxide and your water, remember the water makes things relax, and your sodium hydroxide will relax because it loves water. it will just disperse itself and allow itself to relax and become one with the water. That is exactly what it does when you pour your sodium hydroxide into water. Then in soap making, you take that dissolved sodium hydroxide and you pour it into a certain amount of fat. But the fat is like, I don't play well with water. So you have to make it combine together. We use in soap making a stick blender, and that propulsion forces the sodium hydroxide water mixture. It forces it with the oil. So now what did we say water does? Water forces things to break down. So what happens is those 3 fatty acids and that glycerol, that grouping, they disperse because that's what water does. Water makes things break apart. So that grouping now disperses. And what you have is free floating fatty acids and your glycerol. Now they're apart. And that sodium hydroxide, and remember our sodium hydroxide is salt. Our sodium hydroxide binds with each individual fatty acid. And what you have now is the salt of your fatty acid. So instead of having sodium hydroxide here and olive oil here, you have sodium, which is your salt. You have sodium olivate together. That's what it's now called. It's no longer called sodium hydroxide. It is no longer called olive oil. It is called sodium olivate. Your palm oil is now called sodium palmate. Your coconut oil is now called sodium cocoate. So what is soap? Soap is the sodium salt of fatty acid. That is the definition of soap. It is the sodium salt of your fatty acid. And that is how the soap is made. That's how that bond is formed. So our next question would be, what is lather? Okay, so we've got our soap. After you make your soap, it's exothermic. Sodium hydroxide is extremely exothermic. It's going to create and generate its own heat. It's going to go through its whole process, and we're going to talk about that later on this week. And it's going to make itself some soap. It's going to make itself soap. But once we have our soap, how then does soap get us clean? What is lather? So as you use your soap, it bubbles, you rub it together, that surface area, and it bubbles. And what is a bubble? A bubble is a negative charge and a positive charge. That's what the top point is. That is your positive charge. And what soap does, remember what water does. Water causes things to break down. So you've got your water and you've got your soap and you're rubbing it. And the water causes the dirt to lift to the top of the bubble. And then you rinse the dirt away. That is how lather actually works. Lather causes your bubble. The dirt is now breaking up from your hand because that's what water does. It breaks up from your hand. Your soap is helping it to break up from your hand. It gets caught in the top of the bubble and then it rinses away. So that is how lather actually gets you clean through soap. Our next question, or our next thing that I wrote down here, is the difference between handmade and store-bought soap. I actually get this question a lot. The two main differences, at least that I want to talk about today, the first one is glycerin. So remember when I said that when you have that chemical reaction, you've got in your oils, in your fatty oils, you have 3 fatty acids and a glycol, right? That's your glycerin. So when they combine with that sodium hydroxide and that water, they disperse. And the sodium hydroxide attaches itself to those 3 fatty acids. But what happened to that glycol that was just floating around? Well, that's your glycerin. In handmade soap, that glycerin remains in the soap. Well, what is glycerin? Glycerin is a humectant, which means that it draws moisture to your skin. And glycerin is one of the main ingredients in moisturizers. So I actually brought down a lotion bottle to show you, but now I think maybe I might get in trouble if I do that. But if you just go look at lotions, any lotion, specifically one that begins with a J and ends with Gens, their second ingredient is glycerin. And that's because of glycerin's ability to draw moisture to your skin and provide that moisture to your skin. And that is why handmade soap feels so much better on your skin. After you use handmade soap from using store-bought soap, you kind of say, oh my gosh, this feels so much better. Why? It is because the glycerin in store-bought soap is intentionally removed from the soap and is instead used in products like lotion and other moisturizers because they cost more. So they can put that ingredient in a product that costs more, and then it's more beneficial. It's more cost effective for the company. So that's your first reason. You have glycerin in handmade soap while you do not have glycerin in a store-bought soap. The second reason why handmade soap is so much better is because you know what's in it. Excuse me. In the soap that I've made, and I'm intentionally showing you, well, let's not do that. Let's grab, I'll grab an end piece. So in the soap that I've made, and that's just an end piece, I know what I put in it. I have a formula book that I keep. I know that I have put my basics in there, the sodium hydroxide, the water, and the oils. I know which oils I put in there. If I've put milk in there, I've recorded it. If I've put honey or maple syrup, because those are also humectants and draw that moisture to your skin, then I've recorded it. If I've put sodium lactate, which firms up your bar, I've recorded it. If I've put oats in there, I have recorded it. So I know exactly what it is that is in my bar of soap. However, prior to making this scope, I went to Dove's site and I just kind of took a look at their ingredients, and their ingredients were questionable. I saw some ingredients in there that had scary names, but they're not actually scary things, like stearic acid. Stearic acid has a scary name, but it is not a scary ingredient. Stearic acid is the vegetable version of what citric acid is. So you have your citric acid in your citrus fruits, and you have stearic acid in both vegetables and actually animal fats. But it's kind of like the vegetable version of citric acid. So it sounds scary, but it's not really scary. But then there were some ingredients that for me were scary. For me, they were questionable. So, and one of those ingredients, I wrote it down, was tetrasodium EDTA. And another ingredient was sodium lauryl acetonate. And both of those ingredients, when I looked them up, I said to myself, I'm not sure if this is something that I would want to put on my skin. And I'm a soap maker, so I know that there are surfactants that are safe, and there are surfactants that I would kind of prefer not to use. I know that there are ingredients that sound scary, but that they are not really scary. It's just that you're forced to use the scientific name for things. One last thing about that bar of soap that did kind of bother me was that I am required as a product maker to put my ingredients on my label, and my ingredients list is required to be accurate. However, when I looked up the ingredients for that bar, it told me it had either sodium tallowate, which is the sodium salt of tallow, which is beef fat. It is lard, that's for pig, but tallow is the fat of beef instead of the fat of pork. So it told me it was either sodium tallowate or sodium palmate. So if I'm a vegetarian, I don't know if I can use this bar of soap or not. And I think that it's important for companies to be honest about their product. A push for vegan products and just transparency with what's in your products. I just think it kind of does people a disservice when you say sodium tallowate or sodium palmate. And the funny thing is, both of those products are controversial. So both tallow and palm, they're both controversial. So that is what I have for you today. We talked about what soap is from a chemical perspective. We talk about what lather is, how soap gets you clean. We talked about why you should use handmade soap versus store-bought soap. That was because of the glycerin that store-bought soap removes and handmade soap still has in it, and because of the ingredients that are used in store-bought soap. Feel absolutely free to contact me if you have any questions about the information that I delivered today. My email address is info at noellsgarden.com. info@noellsgarden.com. Do take a visit at my website, noellsgarden.com. Do sign up for my mailing list so I can keep in contact with you. Let you know when new things are coming up, or just find out what kind of stuff that you like. I really, really appreciate you guys for joining me today. Tomorrow, we are going to talk about oil. Specifically, we're going to talk about olive oil, castor oil, coconut oil, and avocado. I'm glad you guys joined me. Thank you very much for joining me. Again, sign up for my mailing list, and I will check you guys out tomorrow. Goodbye now.